Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next installment of our World Religions course. Um, you'll have to excuse me for missing our last in class meeting. You may be able to tell I'm pretty sick right now. Still, I'm recording this on Sunday. Um, so hopefully we'll get through this without too much bruising. I'm pretty sure I'll be able to make it on this Thursday for the Buddhism lecture. Anyway, I'll be releasing information about that as the date approaches and how we're gonna proceed. Anyway, with the view of not falling too far behind, I did want to, give you guys a little bit of a lecture on Hinduism. Uh, so again, this is not something that we're going to be able to, Hinduism is, pretty much the oldest tradition we've looked at so far, and from a historical perspective. And so obviously we're not going to be able to deal with everything that pertaining to Hinduism. Again, these are snapshots. I'm going to try to give you some idea of important concepts, etc. Anyway, so today we're going to talk about Hinduism. So we're moving into the section of the course where we're talking about what's often referred to as the Dharmic traditions. So we've looked at the Abrahamic traditions, so of course Judaism, um, uh, Christianity, Islam. These are often referred to as ethical monotheisms. Uh, the Dharmic traditions are generally understood to be Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism. Now, this usually just refers to traditions that originated historically on the Indian subcontinent. Um, and also, that have been influenced in general by the ideas that are found in Hinduism. So, some of the similarities that you find across Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism is, uh, an emphasis on things like dharma, rebirth, nonviolence, karma. But what's interesting is that each of these traditions will see these things in different ways. So they're understood differently, and because of that, just because you kind of have a sense of one doesn't necessarily mean you understand the other. And one thing we'll see specifically today is this idea that sorry, my phone went off there. Let me turn that off. Sorry. Um, is that so we'll see the differences in, say, for example, the Hindu and Buddhist view of things like dharma, right? These mean slightly different things, right? As does karma. Anyway, so we're going to talk about this, and one thing I am going to say is that these, I think I mentioned this a second ago, is that um, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism all grew at least partially out of Hinduism. And again, they share a lot of commonalities with that tradition. So let's talk about Hinduism. Hinduism is an extremely ancient tradition that arose in what we would now understand as India. We call it India, the Indian subcontinent. And so Hinduism is currently the third largest religious tradition in the world after Christianity and Islam. It has approximately between 1 and 1.5 billion adherents, um, or roughly around 15% of the world's population. The map gives you a sense of where there's a lot of dispersal um, of Hindu practitioners, and the vast, vast, vast majority of Hindus are still found in India, although there are sizable populations elsewhere, including Canada. So, Hinduism is deeply connected to the land of India and also Pakistan. Um, you know, uh, Again, there's a lot of historical stuff that we can't really get into, but just given the fact that we're not in person, and also given the fact that we're trying to crush together so much in such a short time. Um, but one thing we can be sure of is that the civilizations that occupied what we would understand as the subcontinent and places like Pakistan uh, are very ancient. Approximately the Indus Valley civilization was a very important civilization in terms of the development of Hinduism. It was around, it existed for about 1,500 years from around 3000 BCE onwards. There's also what's referred to as the, the Harappan civilization and the Dravidian civilizations. I'm probably not going to ask you any of this stuff on tests, but recent archaeological excavations have uncovered some very interesting and suggestive material from some of these ancient civilizations that influence our understanding of where Hinduism comes from. But in the end, it really is a mystery. It used to be understood by scholars that Hinduism, or at least the sort of Advaita Vedanta, you don't know what that means necessarily, but certain strands of Hinduism came in from outside. They were actually they were they were they were brought in from outside invaders, and this was referred to in scholarly literature for many hundred years as the Aryan invasion theory. So the theory went like this: around 1500 BC, Aryan tribes move in towards India from the west. Um, these were lighter skinned peoples, according to the theory, um, and their language was Sanskrit, and the religion and social structures outlined in the Vedas were that's what they brought. Now, of course, there are certain big questions that arise here. One of them is, you know, the this is a bigger question for the field of comparative religions. So who should we believe? Should we believe who should we put more stock in? People who believe that who have their scholarly theories about how things started, how particular traditions started, or people who think that their traditions have always existed, or at least are far more ancient. This idea of a tension between insiders and outsiders is something that's going to come up again and again in various traditions, right? Is it the objective outsider, whatever that means, who can understand a tradition better, or is it the felt belief world, the phenomenological world of the insider of a religion that has a better sense of it? Well, we probably need both and more than both, but anyway. So the Aryan invasion theory has largely been scrapped lately. In many ways, there were certain racist undertones to this idea that like lighter skinned people brought in the good stuff, to India. Now, again, the point I'm really trying to get at is that the development of Hinduism and its ancient origins is really a mystery to us. But we do know that the name Hinduism comes from the name given by the ancient Persians to the people who lived across the Indus River. Now, by 325 BCE, before the Common Era, Alexander the Great designated this area as India, and Hindu, as I don't know if you've made that connection before, but India, Hinduism, it's Indiaism basically, became a geographical as well as social and cultural designation for millennia. Okay, so by around 1830, the Hinduism was adopted to denote a single cohesive tradition. What's interesting is that was brought from the outside. Again, while there were certain clear cultural commonalities between different groups who we would classify as Hindu, one of the cool things about Hinduism is that it's actually an umbrella tradition. It's like, as we're going to see, you could be a Hindu and believe in many different things. Some of them apparently contradictory. In other words, there's not one way to be a Hindu. Um, and so what's interesting is that by the mid 19th century, Hinduism as an umbrella term was starting to be accepted by most Hindu leaders as well, even though it came in from the West. Now, if we're going to talk about Hinduism, we have to talk about the Vedas. These are the core texts um, of Hinduism, and they are written in Sanskrit, and the Sanskrit is, Veda means knowledge. The four Vedas are Shruti, or traditionally understood to be heard spiritually by ancient sages. Um, and Scholars assert that they have been written down over, a 2,000 year period, but everybody understands that the oral tradition underlying the Vedas is very, very much older than that. Um, there are four Vedas, and again, I'm trying to think of what might be a good sort of cultural comparison. I guess the the Bible for many Christians, and might be, especially the Hebrew Bible would be maybe a good connection, or comparator. Uh, the similarities end in certain places, but you know, uh, for example, many Hindus have not actually read the Vedas, or from front to back, just like many Christians have not read the Hebrew Bible from Genesis to to the end, but it's still sort of the foundational text or group of texts. Anyway, there are four main Vedas: Rig, Atharva, Yajur, and the Samaveda. And each of the four basic collections is broken into four component parts. So there are hymns, there are symbolic interpretations, there are ritual materials, and there are philosophical utterances. Now, before I talk about the Upanishads, or the philosophical utterances, we have to understand that that early Vedic religion was very, very much ritually based. There were ritual sacrifices. There were ritual, ceremonies, and the priests, or the Brahmins, who were responsible for this understood that there was a certain way of doing these. In fact, the universe depended, this continuation depended on these rituals being performed the right way. So the Vedas were very, very key to that. Excuse me. Um, anyway, the Vedas, particularly the Rig Veda, the most famous, contains hymns to various ancient gods: Indra, Agni, Varuna, Yama. The point of the gods at this early stage was sort of this worldly. In other words, people supplicated these gods. People prayed to these gods, offered sacrifices to these gods, mainly for for help in this world, like for a good marriage for a child, or a cure for a sickness, or something like that. Um, and as the millennia have progressed, these ancient gods have largely been superseded in later Hinduism by gods that we might have heard of before. So Devi, Shiva, Vishnu. So I'll talk about these later gods in a few moments. But the last part of the Vedas is what we know of as the Upanishads, or the end of the Vedas, also known as Vedanta. This is extremely important for later Hinduism, and these Upanishads developed the classical Hindu philosophical concepts like Brahman, the oneness of all reality, this sort of tension in Hinduism between the the personal and impersonal ultimate. Now, I want to break down each of these and talk a little bit about um, about each of these ideas. So first, so what are some of these basic concepts? Well, in classical Hinduism, the problem is that, now again, I just want to be clear that there's always going to be differences in how Hinduism is practiced but in terms of classical Hinduism, so it's hard to generalize, but we still can generalize a little bit. So the main problem in classical Hinduism is the idea that the eternal soul is trapped by karma. Now, I'll talk about karma in terms of Hinduism in a few more minutes, but the cause of this, trap, this entrapment, is ignorance, resulting in attachment. So we're trapped by karma because we're attached to things, because we're ignorant about the nature of reality. So the goal or the end of classical Hinduism is liberation from samsara, or the cycle of birth and death and birth and death. And the name for this release is moksha. Okay, so these central ideas are outlined in the Upanishads, and the Upanishads are diverse, but they develop much of the perspective that became the basis of classical Hinduism. So they speak about the one reality from which all other reality emanates. And the name for this reality is Brahman. So this is where things get interesting, because throughout Hinduism, there's sort of, I don't want to say it's a tension, but there's this sort of attempt to balance the sense of Brahman as an impersonal, understandable cosmic force, like gravity almost. This force that pervades everything, that pervades the universe, and this idea of a personal God that cares. So this is, they're understood to be both the same thing. So, again, the problem is, in Hinduism, the basic problem is that the eternal soul, or the Atman, is trapped by karma. Now, the law of karma asserts that we are inevitably determined in our future actions by the effects of our past actions. Now, this could be actions that we performed in this life, or maybe actions that we performed several lives ago. Okay, it's this idea that think about karma as a cosmic law of sort of moral cause and effect. So until we break that chain, until the karmic chain is broken, the Atman, or the one God that lives inside us, because remember, Brahman pervades everything, including us, that the Atman will continue to journey through unending rebirths. Now, hold on, because you might be thinking, well, that doesn't, so basically we live forever, that sounds okay. But you got to think about it. It's not like, in Hinduism, this isn't a good thing. And we're going to see this also with Buddhism and others. Basically the Dharmic traditions agree on this idea that what we don't want to live again and again and again, because we die again and again and again, and we suffer again and again and again. Surely each life, and of course, this isn't always just stuff that's like, what am I trying to say here? It's not always just stuff like, that we're human, for example. According to many Hindus, we can be reborn, depending on our karma, as other animals, in different sort of realms. Some of them, nicer than others, some of them worse than others. Now, again, really the main underlying problem is ignorance. And this ignorance leads to suffering. It's like banging your head against a wall forever. Like, that's not good. That's bad. Okay? Like, there might be occasional times when, it's good. Like, things are going well. Like, you're happy in your life, in one of your lives. But the underlying dharmic sense is that that's going to go away. Everything that arises passes away. Okay? Although that's much more Buddhist. We'll talk about that next week. But the cause of all this is ignorance. Okay? In fact, the very idea that living again and again and again is a good thing is ignorant, according to traditional Hinduism, right? the cause of all this is ignorance resulting in attachment. So essentially, uh, we inside each of us is a core of that divine oneness. Okay, so we are Brahman. That Tattvamasi, thou art that. You are Brahman, according to this understanding. Okay, the entrapment of the Atman by karma is the result of avidya, or ignorance. And this sense of ignorance is unusual, though. It doesn't mean, we're all dummies or we don't have data or knowledge. It's spiritual confusion about our true human nature and the true nature of all reality. This is the problem of believing, according to Hinduism, that the shifting world in which we live day to day is the only reality. Because this is an illusion, we become attached to this world. We become attached to this body, to our thoughts, to the things that we think are important, the relationships that we think are important, okay? Remember, these fall away as well. So we seek fulfillment in the activities of this world. So our relationships, our work, our leisure activities, eating, making money, but what we're unaware of, our ignorance, is that we're unaware that these attachments to things lead us deeper into the karmic chain. So they attach us more and more to the world. So what's the world? Well, different schools of thought in Hinduism differ on this question, but most would suggest that the world of the senses comes into existence and is dissolved. It comes into being and falls away again. Comes into being and falls away. Universes come and go, just like us. Okay? It doesn't have a beginning and it won't end. Okay? Now, let's talk a little bit about moksha. Moksha is the end or liberation from the cycle of rebirth. So, moksha is liberation from samsara, or that cycle of life and death, and life and death, and life and death. Moksha is the culmination, and it can be realized in this life. It doesn't have to be only a state of existence after death, where you go to heaven, or you have pie in the sky when you die, kind of thing. The branches of Hinduism share moksha, generally speaking, as the ultimate goal of religion. But each branch differs on the nature of what it means to be trapped in karma and to be liberated, and what moksha looks like. So here are some of the ideas we've looked at so far. So of course we've looked at karma. This is the neutral moral cause and effect of the cosmos. So we have free will, but we're also determined by our past choices that we've made. Again, this isn't just like, this is hard for a lot of Westerners to understand, because we think, well, how can I be held responsible for something that I didn't do? But in the Hindu conception, in the Dharma conception, you did do it. You just don't remember that you did it. And so, there's this sense that, we are bound by karma. Now, moksha is the release or the loosening of the shackles of karma. And this exists. The state of existence is beyond consciousness of time, space, causation, form, extension. And of course, that cycle is samsara. Okay? Birth, death, rebirth. Birth, suffering, death, rebirth. Birth, suffering, death, rebirth. Okay. So the Upanishads tell us that the true nature of every living being, including you behind the screen, behind your eyes, is an eternal soul, or Atman, that's actually one with Brahman, right? And as I mentioned before, the problem is ignorance of who or what we truly are. So everything in the universe is that's outside of the Brahman Atman unity is really only an illusion brought about by our ignorance. Okay? And the problem is that we're attached. And it's easy for us to desire. Our desires are chains that bind us to this karmic outcome. Okay? Especially to this illusion that somehow we are a distinct self. Okay? just the fact that many Westerners, when you say something like, well, there is no distinct self, that's you, people go, what? Huh? Well, the fact that that's so hard for so many of us to wrap our heads around, again, not intellectually, but in here, in our hearts, um, is for many Hindus, part of the problem of ignorance. Again, it's not data that we don't know. It's not some math problem we need to figure out. It's here and here. So, what is the Atman? Well, the Atman is the eternal self, um, and um, it is basically the part of us that is eternal. The jiva is the physical distinct self, which is controlled by karma. Um, so the Atman does not act because it's eternal, but the jiva does act. It thinks it acts anyway, and it's shaped by karma. So the Upanishadic Atman um, is problematic for many people because in our ignorance we convince ourselves that our true nature is the self that acts. So, you watching this right now and then thinking I need to do this for a test, and me sitting here trying to explain this, so that I'm, fulfilling my career obligations, whatever. That's fine, but the person that's doing that is unreal. The Atman that is connected to the universal or the eternal does not act. It doesn't act because it doesn't have to act. It's eternal. Um, but until this ignorance is overcome, the Atman remains trapped, so to speak, in the cycle of rebirth. Okay? But once true knowledge is obtained, then the Atman experiences liberation from the cycle of rebirth. Again, knowledge of truth is not conceptual. Or else you might just explode into moksha right now, just having heard me yammer on about this. But real, true knowledge is mystical and intuitive, and it involves an indescribable sense of oneness that's achieved through total self discipline and meditation. So, of course, we're talking about the Vedas and the Upanishads, which are sort of the ends of the Vedas. But there are many, 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 many other important sacred writings in the tradition of Hinduism. The Ramayana, the Mahabharata are two big examples. The Ramayana is the tale of the earthly deeds of the god Rama and his wife Sita. The Mahabharata is, you know, it's well, actually, it's a very, very, very long, uh, epic tale. But the really uh, well known part of the Mahabharata is what's known as the Bhagavad Gita, or Song of the Lord. The Bhagavad Gita, I just want to talk a little bit about this because it's probably the most well known Hindu classical writing, if you want to think of it that way. The Bhagavad Gita, or the Gita, summarizes the dominant themes of classical Hinduism and opens the way for later developments in Hinduism. So the Gita is part of the story told by the Mahabharata. Now, the Mahabharata is the narrative of the war between two leading families in ancient India, the Pandavas and the Kauravas. Now, the Bhagavad Gita is all about how this very, very brave warrior prince, Arjuna, expresses despair over having to fight loved ones. Now, the Mahabharata is the story of this sort of ongoing family feud. Think of it that way. And Arjuna's chariot. So Arjuna is on the Pandava side, and they're ranged and they're about to fight these two sides, and he despairs because he sees teachers and uh, uh, friends and family members on the other side that he's going to have to fight and kill, or fight and be killed by, in this war, and he doesn't want to do that. And it turns out that Arjuna's charioteer, or Krishna, responds to Arjuna's dilemma, and most of the Gita, or the Bhagavad Gita, is the record of the dialogue between Arjuna and Krishna. Now, it turns out that Krishna, the charioteer, is actually, he eventually reveals himself to be the avatar, or the earthly form of the god Vishnu. Um, and Arjuna, at the height of this, the Bhagavad Gita actually sees Vishnu in his true form. But the major themes of the Bhagavad Gita are the stress and importance of Dharma. Now, what's Dharma? Dharma is, in Hinduism anyway, is duty. Think of Dharma as duty. Okay? In Buddhism, Dharma means something slightly different. It means like teaching or knowledge. In Hinduism, it is duty. So the duty that the situation, the duty that you're born into, the duty that the situation calls for. So Krishna, Vishnu, teaches Arjuna, the warrior, that as a warrior, he has to fulfill his dharma and to go into battle against his enemies, whether they're friends and family or not. As human beings, we can't avoid acting in the world. But the key is to act in such a way that we're not attached to the results of our actions. So again, what Krishna is doing here is reaffirming the Upanishadic teaching about human nature. So we have a material self that acts, but we also have an eternal nature that does not move. It can't be killed and it doesn't kill. It's the Atman and it does not act. So if we're attached to our actions, Krishna is saying, we're identifying with that temporal or karmic self, and then we become bound by karma, okay, within that cycle of rebirth and death. That's samsara, okay? But if we can overcome our attachment to the outcome or the results of our actions, then we're identifying with our eternal or unchanging self. So if Arjuna fulfills his dharma or his duty as a warrior, but without attachment to the effects of his deeds, then he'll be acting in a spiritually proper manner. So when you dig down, the Gita actually offers three main paths to spiritual fulfillment. There's the way of action, that is beyond the emphasis on acting in accordance with Dharma and the teaching about non-attachment to results. There's the way of knowledge, that is one seeking spiritual liberation can follow a path of mental and spiritual exercises through which the Atman is experienced. This is the path of meditation. And then there's the path of devotion. This is offering one's actions as sacrifices to a personal god. This is where beings like, Vishnu or Deva or Shiva come in. Okay, this path of devotional service or bhakti is the most widely practiced type of Hinduism in later periods, but most Hindus understand that, say, if I'm a devotee of Vishnu, for example, Vishnu is the manifestation that I can understand of this greater cosmic underlying source or power called Brahman. Okay, it's the articulatable part that I would worship of Brahman. Okay. Okay, so which is the best path to spiritual fulfillment? Is it selfless action guided by duty or dharma? Is it meditation on the impersonal absolute, or is it devotion to a personal god? Is the Gita suggesting that the nature of the ultimate is monistic or monotheistic or pantheistic? These are questions that really don't have answers. They've really inspired generations of commentators to write mountains of books on the Bhagavad Gita. And I actually have a feeling that the Bhagavad Gita's ambiguity on this kind of stuff is intentional. Something to remind us that as human beings, we are finite and we can't really pin down the nature of the ultimate, especially when we are trapped in that sort of jivic, samsaric, karmic cycle. Okay? So what are the big traditional divisions within Hinduism? Well, you'll see. I've tried to I actually pilfered this from the internet, but it's pretty good. It gives a general sense of, the main different traditions of devotion in Hinduism today. So there's the Vaishnava tradition, which is, puts Vishnu as the creator god. There's the Shaivite tradition, that would posit Shiva rather than Vishnu. There's the Shakta tradition, which says it's Devi, not Shiva or Vishnu. And then there's the Smarta tradition, which is a little bit more uh, 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 would say that there isn't a supreme deity. There's just there's a principle of Brahman, but it's unknowable. Anyway, you know, these are you if you're interested, you can go down the rabbit hole on each of these. Each of these traditions has a very centuries long history within Hinduism. But these are the big traditional divisions, and oops. And so that's something just important to keep in mind, that how Hinduism is expressed is very different depending on which Hindu you're talking to. So let's talk a little bit about caste. This is another thing that's hard for Westerners to understand. In the 16th century, when Portuguese merchants encountered these pre-existing divisions in Indian society, they called these things caste, the caste system. Um, in the traditional division, there were four main classes, or varnas. There were the Brahmins, and these were priests or scholars. There were the Kshatriyas. These are the warriors and princely class. There's the Vaishyas, the farmers, merchants, bankers. Then there were the servants, the Shudras. Of course, there were the pariahs, or the outcasts, or the untouchables. But these were people who were assigned the lowest of the low in terms of social distinctions. But the four basic ones, the Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Sudra classes, form the basis of an exceedingly complex social organization based on many jatis or subclasses, social hierarchies. So things like a higher caste member is not usually allowed to touch a member of the lower caste without becoming ritually impure. Marriage and social movement were extremely limited, and still are. The caste system it's often understood by Westerners that the caste system has been abolished in India, but that's not true. The caste system is not illegal itself. Caste is a part of Indian life still today, um, but there are laws against discrimination based on caste. In terms of things like employment or government work, especially when it comes to who are those people who are referred to as untouchables. Um, uh, Again, we could go down a rabbit hole about caste. There are pluses and minuses to caste. One of obviously, or else it wouldn't still be around. Again, it's hard for Westerners to wrap our heads around this idea that there are some people are just born into higher castes than others, no matter what they did to deserve it. But again, in Hinduism, there's this sense that, well, they're people are born into particular social classes and castes based on past life choices and experiences they made. It's all about karma, right? And so anyway, the for the twice born, or the three higher classes, that is the Brahmins, the Sudra, what did I say? The Brahmins, the Vaishyas, and the Kshatriyas. They're called the twice born. They're often referred to as the twice born. Um, these, for especially boys, boys in these classes engage in an initiatory rite of passage, or upanaya, and in which they symbolically experience a second birth. For these three highest classes, that is the Kshatriyas, the Brahmins, and the Vaishyas. I always forget the Vaishyas. Um, the laws of Manu, another very important ancient text, prescribes four stages of life. There's the student, there's the householder stage, there's the forest dweller stage, and then there's the renunciant or sannyasin stage. After which, again, there's this idea that in Hinduism, uh, in Hinduism, there's the sense that uh, renunciation and asceticism. There's a place in every person's life, or most people's lives, for to be a student, to enjoy the things of this world, like being a householder, having things and enjoying things like sex and relationships. But then there's also this idea that, in every person's life, those things, those things kind of fade in their luster, and what you really are looking for is to get out of the constant samsaric cycle of birth and death and birth and death and suffering. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that the Dharma treats women slightly differently, quite differently. According to many ancient texts, the Dharma of women is very, very different than the Dharma of men. There are the dharma of a woman is to serve her father. Her duty is to serve her father. After her marriage is to serve her husband and to perform household duties. And often after her husband dies, usually before her, there's this sense that the woman's duty is to serve her sons or another male family member. Now, women were not required to pass through those four householder stages, but they were born into a particular class or caste, and they could take the vow of a sannyasin. So they could become, there's a strong tradition of very, very powerful and very, very spiritually astute female renunciants, who would draw many male and female followers. Okay. Now, before I let you go, I know this is a lot to throw at you at once, and I'll post these slides as well. But the key thing to remember is, Hinduism primarily manifests around the world, including in India, in what is essentially a secular state. And so secular in the sense that there is no sort of dominant religion, even though Hinduism, Hindus are the vast majority of the population of India. And so there are many, the laws about, think about things like caste, for example, right? Or women's rights issues. Hinduism as a tradition is still grappling with women's liberation and what that means specifically for their dharmic tradition, right? Because there are many women, for example, who identify themselves as devout Hindus and are followers of the Dharma, but they are also modern women who want to be liberated. And so trying to figure that out is very, very important. Is very, very key for trying to understand Hinduism today. Now, again, this is just a snapshot of Hinduism. I hope it helps to illuminate why so many millions and hundreds of millions of people are still today, this very moment, captivated by this wonderful, ancient, and beautiful tradition, as are all the other ones that we have looked at and will look at today, in the coming weeks of this course. As you can tell, I'm still sick. I'm sorry if I was rambling a little bit. And knock on wood, let's hope I can get into class this week. But of course, I'm not going to go if I'm still sick and I'm going to, cause some kind of super spreader event. But I'll let you know. Either way, I hope you guys have a great week. Enjoy the warm weather if you can. And yeah, talk to you soon. Okay, bye-bye.